Fantastic. Okay, man. Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. Thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk with me. Come on the show and talk a little jujitsu today. I appreciate it.
Dude, yeah, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Well, man, just kind of start off like what do to introduce yourself, what have you been up to recently? We can start there. Um,
Okay. I'm Scott Burr. I'm a third degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. I got my black belt from Steve Maxwell, who was Helson Gracie's first black belt. And in recent years, I've been training with Master Rickson. I got my third degree from Rickson over the summer. Um, so yeah, that's been sort of the main focus of my jujitsu in the last few years was training with him, and also have been writing books for some jujitsu kind of figures. Wrote Richard Bresler's book, helped Robert Drysdale write his first book, and currently working on a book with Chris Haueter about his life and crazy times.
yeah, yeah,
So,
which I just recently interviewed Howder, and it was so fun and entertaining. It's just sitting down and talking to him is because it's you learn things and it's inspiring and it's like a ride,
yeah,
so
absolutely.
I can't wait to I remember the first time I did one of his seminars, I told everybody, I'm like, it's like a performance,
A
and
1000%, yeah.
but I was really into it, and have just immediately saw the value of what he had to offer that very first 10 minutes of meeting him, but well, man, that's awesome. And like a lot of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about today, you kind of let out with, so fantastic. Well, first off, like, I want to get into some things about your writing. I am an aspiring writer to an extent. I don't like, I got a master's in history, and then I taught college
Okay.
for 5 years, and am working on some projects now, and had just been spending my time before that in the classroom or on the mats, teaching. But man, I would really say I just found out about you through the Bresler book,
Okay.
and I found out about it like right before we left California. I was recently out there, and we flew back. And I think I told you when I was messaging you about this podcast, listen to it all the way through. So fantastic listen for anyone. And but you have all these other works as well, or some. I just recently bought Bummed Out City, but
Oh, appreciate it.
I've only gone about an hour into it. So,
Okay.
but I've heard you talk. You have a background in creative writing. Like, what's outside of jujitsu writing? What are some things that you have done prior to your writing with jujitsu, which is how I was exposed to you?
Yeah, so I was I studied creative writing in college. I wanted to be a writer. I mean, really, that's what I wanted to do with my life. I had no real aspirations to be a martial arts instructor. I'd been training in martial arts for a couple of years and really loved it and spent a lot of time doing it in another style. But it was never sort of in my wheelhouse that I wanted to pursue that as a career. I really thought, okay, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna be Michael Chabon. I'm gonna be Fitzgerald. I'm gonna write a great American novel by the time I'm 25, and that's gonna be my life. Which, if you've listened to the first hour of Bummed Out City, there's a lot of that in that character. Um, and so I went to college 2001, 2005. And so for the whatever it was, 14 years between graduation and uh, eventually writing Bresler's book, which has kind of begun sort of this new era of collaboration that I've been in, I was writing fiction. I was writing what they typically call literary fiction. So ended up writing a lot of novels, like a bunch of novels that nobody really wanted to publish. And so eventually got to the point, Bummed Out City is not the first novel I wrote. It's maybe the 10th or something like that. But it was the first one where I was like, okay, I'm gonna put my name on it. I'm gonna put it out there like this. And so it was how I originally started. It was part of this phase of starting to learn how to put things out independently through some of the new technologies that are now available. These print-on-demand capabilities that Amazon now offers, and that there are a few other companies that I'm less familiar with that do the same thing. But it's really an incredible technology where literally you can upload a complete manuscript, formatted, designed, whatever, laid out. You upload a cover and creates an Amazon page, and when somebody orders the book, it prints a single copy and ships that copy to them. So an entirely new paradigm in publishing, and it's really sort of shifted a lot of the model of how publishing works. Not as much as it sounds like people thought it would in the beginning, but it's definitely changed the landscape a little bit. And so these capabilities were coming out, and I had a background in visual arts, and I knew how to do, editing. I knew how to do format. I'd spent so much time just reading and writing, working on my own stuff, working on other people's stuff. And I kind of got to this point where I said, look, a publisher kind of does, I usually say 5 things. Now we'll see if I can remember what the 5 are. They're going to edit your manuscript. They're going to proofread your manuscript. They're going to design your manuscript in the cover. They're going to print your manuscript, and then they're going to promote that book to the general public. And so of those 5, 4 of those you can probably do yourself. You can learn how to do yourself. And if you have even a basic computer these days, you have an awful lot of capability to do those things. Printing is taken care of by a print-on-demand company. And then the job is left to you to promote it, basically. But my theory at the time was that if you can publish something and find a readership for it, it's kind of a proof of concept to a major publisher if they might want to pick it up, which is kind of the point we're at with Richard's book now, where we have enough of a following with that. We've had enough sales with that. The reviews are good. To the point where we could say, look, we did this independently. If you wanted to pick this up and run with it, I think it could be much bigger. But so anyway, this is kind of the paradigm we're in, and it was the paradigm where you now see people like Drysdale when he was, when we were first talking about his book. I kind of said to him, look, you have the credibility in this industry, you have a niche market, you have a recognized name, and you have a story you want to tell that's easy to pitch. I think this is something that you could find a publisher for rather than doing it independently, which is what he kind of consulted with me about doing. And he said, look, I have a massive worldwide network of schools and affiliates. I have a massive following on social media. What would I be paying why would a publisher be taking 85% of the revenues when you and I can do the editing, you, Scott, can do the formatting and the layout and the design, Amazon will do the printing, and I'll do the promotions. So, shit, man. So that's the paradigm that operates inside. I mean, it's the paradigm you see more and more people who have their own followings that they've developed through whatever field they're in, them following. Tim Ferriss, for example, published, I know, his second book. He did it independently for the same reason. He said, I'm going to be the one doing all the outreach, so why would I be paying a publisher? Or why would a publisher be reaping the rewards of those sales? All of which is a long-winded way of saying, like, I ended up doing a lot of writing and then a lot of publishing work, just independently trying to find avenues for my own stuff. And so that when I ended up meeting up with Richard, I had all of these tools, all of these skills to be in a position to help him not only write, but also then produce and edit and format and create and publish and distribute his story. So is that maybe more of an answer
No,
than you were
that's
looking for?
no. I appreciate you delving in and telling the story because I mean that's I'm entertained as I'm sure listeners will be as well. Now on the Bresler book or the Drysdale book, either one was. Well, let's just start with Bresler. Did you kind of approach him? Did he reach out to you? How did that connection form?
So Richard was a guy that I was aware of. My coach at the time and my original teacher, longtime teacher, Steve Maxwell, had always spoken very, very highly of Richard. He said basically Richard was the reason that he passed the instructor certification at the original Gracie Academy. He was like, Richard knew exactly what Horian wanted. He knew how to teach the way Horian wanted. And basically by working with Richard, I learned what I needed to do. And that's how I passed that certification. So it was a name I had known. It was a person I'd been aware of. And at a certain point, I connected with him on social media. The way you friend a lot of these people that you hear about, and you kind of think it's so cool that I'm friends with this person. And excuse me, in the sort of summer of 2019, Richard put out a post. He said, I'm working on writing a book about my story. I need a title for it. And so people kind of were commenting and whatever. And I sent him a message and I said, look, I don't know what stage of this you're in or what your plan is or anything about what you're doing, but just so you know, this is who I am. This is my background. These are the things I can help you do. If you want to have a conversation about this, I would really be excited to help you work on this. And for a variety of reasons, it was a really exciting thing for me because, for one thing, I had been teaching. I've been sort of running a jiu-jitsu school for like over 12 years, something like that. And I had just kind of decided I was going to close that summer. I was like, I just didn't. I wanted to focus on writing, and I was just feeling really like burned out on running a school and teaching, and so I was kind of in this in between zone where I knew I wanted to focus on writing, but I didn't necessarily have a plan for what that. I mean, I was going to just keep writing fiction and keep trying to build that facet of my life, and then this project came along kind of at this perfect moment, and so. My girlfriend and I were planning a trip out to California for January of 2020. And I was like, well, we're going to be out there anyway. Let's get together. Let's have, we'll do it private. And then let's have kind of what you're thinking. And so we met, we hit it off, and basically went from there. And sort of what he had at that point was, and I think if you've listened to the book, I sort of talk about this in the foreword. He had kind of like the beginning of a manuscript that he and one of his students had worked on, and then she had left that project, and so he kind of was just sitting there with this, like maybe fifth of the way done manuscript that was sort of in kind of roughed in, and basically I took that, and then I took like all of the podcasts he had ever been on, all of the interviews I could find with him. And then he and I got on the phone and just did hours and hours and hours and hours of interviews. And so, January 2020 is kind of like the calm before the storm, right? So March, COVID shuts everything down. And so basically all through that first year of COVID, it was just, I always say it's like, I don't have nothing to complain about. It was like perfect timing for me because it's like, yeah, I'm going to sit at the desk and work on Richard's book. And so that was kind of how I spent that first 6 months of real COVID lockdown stuff. Is like, I had the perfect COVID project. And so we got together on that. We put that out. The reviews have been pretty great. It seems like people really have responded to it. We put the audiobook out about a year later. I found a studio here to record it, and yeah, it's been going. We're still it's still chugging along.
Well, again, I really enjoyed it, so good job.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And I can't, I've recommended it to several people, like my students. I mean, I have a large academy here in Arkansas, and like everybody that I know that does jujitsu that also reads or listens to books. So for me, it was huge that you took the time to do the audiobook. Man, I consume over 100 audiobooks a year.
Oh wow,
Now
okay.
I've got 3 bookshelves full of books in this room we're in, and then another bookshelf at home, but I like consuming information and learning, but audio is just my primary mode. I was talking with Drysdale about this. I got a copy of his book when I was in Vegas for Masters Worlds, but it's like at a certain point on some books, I will get the audiobook and then I will take a physical copy. I'm talking like this is, there's some books that you just will endlessly read your whole life. But I like those books. I like listening to and reading at the same time. And there's a term for this. Always forget what it is, but intellectuals said, okay, you're doing that. It's called this, but that's like I really get a lot of benefit from that personally. But audiobooks have not been a point of emphasis. And a lot of like when I worked in education, textbook brokers, there was no audiobook. There is like you can get like the screen reader, kind of like Kindle, but that's it. So I just massively appreciate the ability to go buy your other book or the Bresler book on Audible, because man, that was just such an easy transaction for me. Like I did it like, oh, I'm going to be flying all day. Like this makes perfect sense,
No, 100%. Yeah, I think given the way we all consume content now, like, and it's the kind of thing I don't want to say I resisted, but when I was kind of young and I had these romantic ideas about being a writer, it was about having that book on the shelf. I want to have that physical book and as I got older, I really realized, among other things, the point of any piece of art is its ability to connect with an audience. And so if you, for some reason, would refuse to do an audiobook version or say, oh, no, I don't want to, why would you create another hurdle to a connection to your, I mean, economically alone, right? You don't want to create hurdles between your customer and your product. But two, I think, having listened to it, I think you might agree that the message in Richard's book, I think, is really important for individuals, also for the jiu-jitsu community at large at this moment, depending on how you feel about kind of the points he makes in that book. And so there's a responsibility to the potential in that book to make that book accessible to people who I don't have time to sit down and read the book. I don't read books, but I drive a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I fly a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. It's a no-brainer. It's about like, so it starts when you start thinking about it in terms of how do you in some ways meet people where they are, bring the message to the people or bring the content to the people. Yeah, audiobooks are great for that. Absolutely.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the very first word you really said is it's audience. Like when I'm writing, I was taught to always like ask myself that question, like, okay, who's my audience and what might they enjoy more than I might like giving them? It's like
100%.
and it's like striking a mean with that, and it's challenging, and it takes a lot of revision. And so a couple of questions further on the Bresler, just like the process of that book. So he has a manuscript. You're doing these interviews, and interviews are so fascinating. That's something I wanted to talk with you about because, sometimes I do a lot of interviews and have over time with this podcast, and sometimes they go incredibly well, and sometimes I suck, and there's just, it just doesn't go the way you foresee. it's just almost like writing, but like what what kind of you're doing this by phone? Are you recording them, and then like is how are you formulating these questions that you're asking, Richard? You're doing it long distance. I mean, are you kind of just planning from one to the next? Like, what went into that?
So there were, obviously in the book, there are sort of two main um, facets of that. One of them is chronological and historical, and one of them is sort of, you might say, philosophical, right? That there are parts of that book where he wants to talk about the principles of teaching or the principles of jiu-jitsu that he's learned. And those don't exactly, that's not the same thing as saying, okay, when were you in, when did you get to Denver and who was with you when you were there, right? So, you have these two different kinds of conversations you're having, right? Which is, same as any podcast, and one leads often very naturally to the other. So in our private lesson and in our initial conversations, Richard made a couple of things clear about why he wanted to write the book and what was important to emphasize. So there were elements of, it's important to know the story because the story is being lost. So, how did jiu-jitsu start in America? People don't know. And this history is important for a variety of reasons. It's important that we appreciate the people who did the work, that, laid the groundwork, that we all now get to enjoy. It's important because when we understand the history, we can understand sometimes more about what the priorities of what we're doing, why jiu-jitsu came here, what it was trying to accomplish, all these different things. So there were certain ideological things that he wanted to convey. And then there were certain historical things that we wanted to tell as this story. And so knowing those two things going in, basically Richard and I had sort of a running chronology in my head. And as I'm making notes and stuff, as we're having these conversations, I'm trying to, we're recording the conversations. He and I are just having these conversations. We're going back and forth, and we're sort of going through, in writing how, okay, like, I always think of it as like, there are certain notes you need to hit in order to make this one feel like a satisfying turn or whatever. Mm-hmm. So Richard says, I was, when I met Haueter, I had low self-esteem. I had substance abuse issues. I was really, I had a kind of I was down. I was down in my head. So, okay, where did that come from? It's like, oh, well, when I was a kid, my dad was very critical of me, and I was bullied in school, and I wasn't athletic, and these things. Okay, so give me an example. In what context was your dad critical? What's the context of that? What are the stories from school or from gym class or from trying to play sports that illustrate those things? And how is that woven into, we're going to create a picture of that era and the mindset that you graduate from that era with, and then you enter into adulthood. And okay, now what's going on in adulthood that's creating those same impressions or contributing to those impressions, or how are you stuck? And so when we get to you meeting Haueter, how is that meeting puzzle piecing with the things in your head that we've already established in this story? So filling in those details and filling them in with, with showing, not telling, right? The illustration of the idea of the mindset, the origins of the mindset. And then as we go along, when we start thinking about, okay, what are the ideas that we want to talk about who is jiu-jitsu for, what's important, how is that illustrated by the way different experiences you had with Elio or with Orion, where he said this thing to me. It really shifted my mindset. Elio would do these things where he would take time out of his day to really show me stuff that he wasn't showing other people, because my understanding was this or that, and that's the lesson that I want to carry forward with jiu-jitsu. So it's this melding of biography and the evolution of an understanding that gives you the opportunity to explore the ideas and bring out the message that we're hoping to convey through the book. And so the process of that interview was, I have kind of a loose idea of this in my head. I think in the introduction to the book, I sort of I include the email I wrote to Richard when I kind of said, here's what I think this book could be. So very early on, I had this idea of, his arc as a character, from this bullied kid to this, older, wiser, self-confident teacher who's now in a position of helping people go on the journey that he went on. So that's a very interesting arc. And so that arc is illustrated, or that it's punctuated by these experiences, by these teachers he interacted with, by these moments, by these specific conversations he had. And so it was mostly filling in that architecture that I already sort of had from our first conversations. And so when we would have conversations on the phone, I always had a sense of like, okay, I'm missing some stuff over here. I need a little more stuff over here. Okay, this is mostly there, but I need the clincher on this part that's really going to give me the foundation for this part. And how it all weaves together is I kind of don't know. It's like you see the whole picture and then you got to fill it in, right?
Flesh it out, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I started when I was a kid. I was mostly a visual artist, and so like you see the whole page, and you sort of know where your big shapes are, and then you sort of fill in the details around them until all of a sudden it becomes kind of one unified image rather than just chunks floating in space. And so that's kind of how I typically, like, that's what I'm doing with Haueter's book right now. And it's really interesting because, as you can imagine, it's a huge canvas and it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it that is all over the place. And so it's really the biggest and kind of most involved version of that. But it starts from, for me, what's the big narrative we're telling? And then how do we tell the small narratives within that contribute to the big narrative?
Yeah, no, that's well, and I'm excited to see how this what the Haueter book is when I'm buying it on Audible, because I've listened to a lot of him on podcast, and if that's somebody that definitely needs a book written about them, in my opinion, right? Like, I can't wait to consume this material. But like when I started, just like you and I, like, hey Scott, I know who you are, but kind of start us off, and bam, then it just leads into that other conversations. But I asked him, I'm like, hey, kind of do that, and he goes, I am amateur cultural anthropologist. And that's where we start. It was just like a leaping off point. But again, so entertaining and inspiring. He's just a unique individual, and I think that's why, among many other things, he's a significant figure. And on that, like, have there been any? Bresler and Haueter, they're both, in terms of history of jiu-jitsu in the United States. I was telling Haueter this. It's like you could parallel those two people, and others too, Steve Maxwell, with those students of the first Japanese immigrants to Brazil, right? Like the Jacinto Ferros, the Donato Pires dos Reis, those people, the Carlos Gracies, that went on and they had students and schools and academies. And it's almost like it's so fascinating because most of those people I mean, they see some of the value, but I don't think it's the way that maybe some of the people on my rung of the ladder. It's like, well, these people are very historically significant, in my view, and in the view of people I speak with as well. And you know, like I'm sure it's like there's some humility there, but it's almost like what you're saying with your writing. It's like you have all this other writing. In 100 years, that could be your most famous works, right? And you're not even appreciated for it in your own time. And
Right.
I think with the
I would
Drysdale,
hope, yeah.
with the Drysdale, like you're appreciated for this jujitsu stuff, obviously, but with the Drysdale thing, like it's he a point he makes in both of his books is he's trying to reclaim some of this history for some people that commonly, you know, for one reason or another, the sources being, you know, not available, scholarship done on the topic, you know, they need to be told, their story needs to be told as well. And you know, a lot of times in the past, their story was omitted when it was going on and after. So it's interesting to kind of reclaim history that way, or just to document. And obviously, I'm fascinated by that. But with these two projects, I mean, are there any like unforeseen challenges or like great differences you've noted between your approach with the Bresler project and with Haueter's book, or is it kind of going about the same for you, or what would you say with that?
So, I mean, there are always, it's always, it's maybe like any other expedition, right? You know where you are, you know where you're trying to go, and you have a general idea of what that's going to be, but your path to it is going to evolve as you learn more, as you get farther in. Maybe the way you thought it was going to work, it's not working that way, so you need to, I mean, like jujitsu, like anything else, right? And so the process is always a process of sort of problem solving and finding best solutions in real time. Um, those those two books are, I will say, one of the things that's really interesting about telling those two stories, and this is just very specific about these two guys, is that, much like Rickson's book, Richard's book is written in it didn't break the model when it came to elaborated on have been the same. It's I start off, you know who I am. I'm a figure. Now I'm going to tell you where I started. Now I'm going to tell you my trials. Now I'm going to tell you my biggest trial. Now I'm going to tell you the lessons I've learned. Now I'm going to give you lessons out the door, and you're going to go follow those, right? So that's kind of a standard framework, but it's dependent on the author or the subject being at an end point. Like they've reached their conclusions, they've come to their wisdom, they have their wisdom to share, and that's where they are. And one of the challenges that I was very aware of, even in our first conversations between Chris and I, is that Chris, despite the fact that there are things that he says that we all quote, Chris is not a guy who I think will ever come to conclusions. Chris is a guy who is constantly curious, right? So to write the book as though Chris had arrived at some sort of wisdom that he was now going to, he'd been walking up the hill, he'd arrived at the top, and he turns around and he faces the rest of us and he tells us, I am at the mountaintop, let me tell you what it looks like from here. That's never going to be Chris. Chris is going to keep, when he gets to the top of that, he's going to, oh, look at that one, and he's going to walk over there. And then he's, oh, well, look at that one. That's the beauty of Chris Haueter, right? That's the uniqueness and the beauty of that person and that mind. So we could not write that book in the way that we wrote Worth Defending, or that Peter wrote Breathe, or that Goggins wrote Can't Hurt Me. It's not, it would be so artificial to say, here I am, Chris Haueter, 6th degree black belt with my wisdom to share, and let me tell you all, because that's just not how he presents himself. That's not how he is. That's not where he is in his mind. He's still a student. He's still searching, right? He's still learning. So, and not that Richard's not a student, not that we're all not students, but Chris is, and I've said this in other conversations about this, Chris is Captain Kirk. He's just interested in what's the next planet. The universe is vast, and he wants to see as much of it as he can. So this is not Odysseus has gone out and he's come back and now he's going to tell this story. He's still going. So that's a different story than the story of somebody who's, gotten to the mountaintop and is going to tell us his view from his vaunted position. And so the approach we took in creating the narrative that would carry us through his story, which sounds almost strange because you go, well, it's his life story is a narrative. You say, yeah, but a narrative needs to, I always compare it to music. It's like you need to resolve back to the root. Meaning if you go G, C, D, if you stay on D, it doesn't sound right until you get back to that G. And now the song can end, right? So G, C, D, G, C, D, G, C, D, G, C, D, G, we're done, okay? Chris, he's just going. So we're never gonna get back to G in some way because, the implication would be that book's done and then a year from now you're gonna talk to Chris and he's gonna be the same Chris. And he's not. He's gonna keep learning and changing. So the way we crafted the story around that had to take into account that phenomenon, and not only that phenomenon, but the fact that that's something we want to present. An accurate portrait of Chris Haueter would include that element, and the absence of that element would feel very false. So that was it's been a really unique, I don't want to say challenge, but unique puzzle to solve that's different than Richard's book, is different than Drysdale's book, different than the other 2 collaborations I did in between. And it was something I said to Chris. I was like, that's great because that's what I want. I feel like I kind of get the Richard's book, and then the 3rd collaboration I did, which was Confessions of a Hollywood Trainer, which is great. They're kind of that story though, right? Is, here I am, let's go back to the beginning. Here's where I could have gone wrong. Here's where my life changed. Here are the lessons I've learned. Here are the lessons I can give you. Let's go. Which is great. I love those books. We all love those books. We publish however many thousand of those books a year. But I was like, I kind of get it in terms of writing it. I want something that's a little more challenging. I don't want to just write another Worth Defending. I want to write something that's got a different puzzle to solve. And Chris is certainly that puzzle. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, that's, well, even more exciting now because, obviously they're going to be different books, and just talking with Chris on the podcast or like at his house, which we immediately got off into the fall of the late Republic, and just right out the gate. Yeah. And I was just like, oh man, this is awesome, but it's, thinking in conversations I've had with him or podcasts I've listened to, talking with him on our podcast, it's like, oh man, how I was thinking about you. It's like, how can you even encapsulate this? Like, because it's not that he's he's all over the place, but there is a story there, and again, I think that, I see a lot of value. You see a lot of value. I know a lot of people who, again, look at these sort of American pioneers, this whether they're the Dirty Dozen, the peripheral people. I think there's a lot of significance there. And a question on that, like, so how did you meet Steve Maxwell first? And you know, you mentioned he's Helson's first black belt, but like, what is his significance within the you know this time?
Within, meaning significance within sort of
Well,
the
the
current
broader,
era.
yeah, I like the broader jujitsu community, like, or within just like the historical narrative to be told about like jujitsu in the United States. Like, I mean, I've been in around people that, I mean, Steve Maxwell just comes up in conversation with people like Chris Haueter's and Richard Bresler's, you know, and I think that he's also a part of this story. Obviously, I mean, you take the Helsons, Orion, Hickson, they're sort of first few students are notable in the narrative to me, you know, and where does he fall within that? Like, what's his part of the story?
So, so yeah. So I'm to go as the first part of your question. I met Steve in 2008. Um, we had so after college, I moved back home. I went back to training at that same martial arts school where I'd been training, and by then it's like 2005. The Ultimate Fighter's happening, and so everybody's getting into MMA. We're starting to really, as you see what the training looks like, and now that the sport has sort of unified as okay, Muay Thai, boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, da 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 da. We see the blueprint. So man, we need to do this. We all want to be legit martial artists. We don't want to be just like guys in their gis who jump around and do kicks and can't win in a fight. So we started bringing in my longtime training partner at the time, my instructor in Kuksul, Jason Zakrajcek, who is now also a Steve Maxwell black belt. He was like, dude, we got to do this. So he starts bringing in a Muay Thai instructor. He started bringing in Jiu-Jitsu. He started going up and training with a guy named Donald Park, who was a Haueter purple belt, had a club in Cleveland Heights, about like 30 minutes from us. And he started bringing all that knowledge back. And then eventually Donald moved to Chicago. One of his blue belts took over that club, a guy named Darren Branch, who's now a Haueter black belt. And Darren started coming to our school and teaching 1 day a week. I was running up there and training with them. And so we're training for like 2.5 years. We're white belts, we're doing MMA, we're idiots punching each other in the face. And one of the women who was training with us she was also a big fitness, strength and conditioning person. And she heard about Steve as one of the godfathers of kettlebells in America, which he also is. And he was in Philadelphia at the time. And so she went to Philadelphia to do a kettlebell certification with him, get her kettlebell level 1 instructor certification. And at the time, Steve had just sold his school and gotten divorced, and he had moved into a Sprinter van, and he was going to start driving back and forth across the country doing seminars. And she was like, why don't you come through Cleveland? You can park in our driveway and you can come teach, some classes and seminars at the school. So he came it was September of 2008. He taught a seminar, and he and Jason and I, we all just hit it off. And he promoted Jason and I to blue belt. We'd been training for about 2.5 years at that time. And from that point on, he was in a Sprinter van. He was driving back and forth. We'd see him a couple times a year. He'd come in, do seminars, sort of assess us, promote us when it came time to be promoted. And we were his dudes. And eventually he sold the Sprinter and he started traveling internationally. And so by the time I'm like a brown belt, he started bringing me along with him to different stuff. So like he would film online, like instructional videos for like strength and conditioning modalities, or he would teach different instructor certifications in his like kettlebell system or his bodyweight training system or breathing. And so I would go and assist at a lot of those seminars. So, and then after I got my black belt, started going internationally with him a little bit more. So it's like we'd do video shoots in Vegas, we'd do kettlebell certs in like Red Deer University in Texas or in California or South Carolina, or would, you know, he would have these camps that I would go and assist at. So went to like El Salvador, went to Costa Rica, went to like all over Europe. And so, yeah, it was just with Steve for a long time, spent a lot of time with Steve, kind of did a lot of his various training modalities during that time, got certified in a bunch of those. But so, which kind of leads to this idea of like, so Steve was a guy who was always, he was a wrestler. He was a big trainer, fitness guy. He had a long time, he had a gym in Philadelphia called Maxercise that was kind of famous. He would train celebrities for movies. He would train, you know, the owners of the Philadelphia Eagles and stuff like this. They were his clients. And he was always, the story he would tell is he was always looking for something that, you know, he loved wrestling, but as you know, get into your adult years, there's no real, you know, it's not like you can go do wrestling necessarily. It's not like going to play tennis or something, right? And so he was always looking for something that, you know, would scratch that itch. And he heard about the Gracies, and there was a seminar in, God, I want to say it was in New Jersey. I don't know why I can't remember this at the moment, but it was in like 88. And he went to that seminar and he was like hooked. And so after that, he opened up, he rented the second floor of Maxercise, above Maxercise, put in mats, started teaching jiu-jitsu, like what he had learned. And then he would every couple of months, he would fly to California, do privates with Horian, fly back, teach what he'd learned. A couple of months ago, go fly to, you know, so he was training with those guys, you know, going on the Gracie cruises, going to these different seminars they're teaching. And he's basically coming up at a time when all the brothers are together, you know, that sort of that early perfect time when kind of right before because the Academy opens in like 89, 90. And so he's right there in that era. And so like he's got classes with Haueter, he's got the old man, he goes down to Brazil, he's staying at the ranch, he's like with Horian a bunch, he takes classes from Rickson, he takes classes from everybody. And eventually, as the brothers start to like, you know, it becomes a thing where Royce and Horian are going to run the academy, and then Rickson's going to do his own thing, and Helson's going to be in Hawaii. And so he said he just, as it started to split up, he really gravitated toward Helson. He's like, he just felt connected to Helson. Helson was always, one of the things he always said is like, Helson always asked about my kids. Like he was only one of the brothers who always, whenever I would see him, he'd ask about my kids, and he would bring like little presents for my kids. And so he just felt connected to Helson. And so he got his, what was it? He got his blue and purple belts from Horian. He got his brown belt from Royce and Horian, and then he got his black belt from Helson. And this is kind of funny because like I've been actually trying to help him figure this out, and I've been like emailing with everybody. He can't remember what year. It was like either 1999, 2000, or 2001, and depending on who you talk to and what you look at, there's different dates.
That's not uncommon, right?
Yeah.
Like that's why, again, reclaiming this history is so important.
Totally.
On this exact side of things. Like, and to look at that, like you're talking about 88, 89. And, you know, we're talking about like with the Drysdale project, that's stuff 100 years ago, you know,
Right.
and we were able to reclaim it. But it's crazy to me how this stuff that just occurred, we're like, I've heard also this, I believe it was like Craig Kukuk's black belt promotion or something in Brazil. I could be wrong on this. I just took notes on it recently, but I want to say like, this has been verified by Steve Maxwell. He was in the background.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you know, like there's like a couple of stories I've come across like that where Steve Maxwell is a peripheral character. Like Chris Burns and I were talking about Helio's 40 lessons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, but dude, I got these pictures from Steve Maxwell right here. It was like 50 or 80. I can't remember which one, which I have them saved in my drive now, you know? So it's interesting that they're, you know, it's like this. It's like, I think they didn't understand Like here we are like, oh man, this is significant, you know, and that's just the best way I can describe it. But I think at the time they probably didn't see the significance of what they were a part of, and the documentation is coming later, you know. And I think that was the case with Bresler too, was that I think there was like a year discrepancy on his or something like that, where
Right.
it
Well,
was like
Fabio said
uncertainty.
1 year, and yeah.
Yes. So that's another example. That's interesting. So, but yeah, there's frustrating as a historian, just like we don't know the date. What, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's like you know from the reading this history and talking to these guys, like they struggled so long to make anybody care. Like the idea that you would document these things with the presumption that one day people are going to care a lot, that's so far from your thinking. When you can't even get 20 people in your town to like give you a second conversation, you know? So I
Yeah.
think they
No, that's
really thought like, I mean, a lot of those guys it was like, this is going to be a niche thing forever. Like, and it's one of the things we talk about in Richard's book too, is that like Horian had the vision, right? Horian, you know, I think we have a line in that book where we say something like, as big as jiu-jitsu has gotten, I still don't think it's as big as Horian thinks it can be. You know, Horian's vision is big. And, you know, but other than him, everybody else was like, dude, we can't even get, you know, we go to these schools, you fight the instructor, we get one guy who shows up for one class after that. Like, this is gaining no traction. And Horian's like, nope, one day it's going to be huge. But so everybody else, like, you know, you get your blue belt, like you care, and maybe your buddies care, and you're like, no one else will ever care. And I'm like, Richard, when did you get your blue belt? It's like, what? Why would have I ever bothered to remember what date I got my blue belt? Nobody cared, right? So it's weird.
well, and just I mean, honestly, too. This is weird. I'm 36. I started training in '06 and got my black belt in 2018. I believe. See, here we are. I'm like, whoa, you know. But it's.
Yeah,
I used to pride myself as an instructor. Like I remember what it was like to be a white belt, and I remember vividly those times. And the further I get away from being a white or blue belt, it's just like the kind of the lines blur. Like I'll be recalling some story of a lesson learned, and it just kind of like, well, it was in the colored belts that I learned that way. It just kind of becomes a more obscure era, like colored belts and black belt, you know, like it's,
totally.
but I could definitely see, I mean, man, so for people like Bresler and Haueter, how long ago that was, you know?
I was lucky enough to name drop here. I was lucky enough to have dinner with Luis Heredia like 2 nights ago. He was in town to teach a seminar. And he was telling this crazy story about going to this Marine base with like Half and Hickson when Half was like 14. And you know, one of the guys were with us like, what year was this? And he's like, 88, 89, like, and it's like, how could you not remember that? So, but you know, whatever. It's just like, it's all in the soup sort of your past. I mean, I don't know what I did last week. I mean, how am I going to nail down any of these things, I guess, you know? It's
Well,
hard to,
maybe some nerds like me, you, the Chris Burnses of the world, it will all start documenting this, which I think is what's going on, really.
yeah, yeah. There's certainly, it's nice. And Drysdale clearly very much is a big part of this. I mean, he's a huge figure in the effort he's put into these projects, the two books and the movie that, you know, fingers crossed comes out sometime soon. Clearly there is this movement that says, no, this stuff is really important and we do want to document this. So thankfully it's not like it's being lost in an era where nobody cares that it's being lost. Like people are appreciating the importance, and they're saying, no, we're not going to let this information just slip into the void. You know, we're going to write it down. So
Well, and you know that's kind of a point that Drysdale made, or and that is a few of the people that he interviewed is in the books was that I want to say Hobson Gracie said this in the first book was that hey, you know, Maeda he wasn't really appreciated in his own time either. It was really when Horian started telling that story around
Right.
that era we're talking about, late 80s, early 90s and on, that, oh, this guy's significant because look at these guys. And I think that is kind of what we're seeing, right? It's just like the significance is becoming apparent as I mean, just in the time I think that you have been involved. We could do a whole discussion and save for another time on just what's changed. I remember there used to be no black belts. Seeing a purple, I remember the first purple belt I saw,
Me too,
like a
for
damn
sure.
unicorn, you know,
Yeah.
like literally walked in and everybody's like, oh, it's a purple belt over there rolling, right? It was like, what? Like, because the only person I knew that was a blue belt was my instructor,
Yep.
you know?
100%.
So, but yeah, that was, you know, it's kind of like eras of like, I got in around that Griffin Bonner, UFC,
Hmm.
Ultimate Fighter era. But you take that,
Yep.
then it's like Haueter and those guys, they're pre UFC era, right? So there's like some cool generations within this. I like how Drysdale talked about the waves or phases of in the second book, right? Like that
Mm.
was kind of a mode that he used to delineate. But that is, you know, I think that model could be applied to these people here in the U.S. With the Americans on that side. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, well,
I haven't had a chance to read his second book actually,
were
but
you involved with the second book at all, or?
no, I was tied up with like two other projects at the time, and so I couldn't. But I
Yeah,
was super psyched together, and yeah, I'm super psyched it's out.
well, kind of last question. We can wrap it here. So on that first book, like man, I poured through that. Like it's one of those ones I was telling him, I'm like, hey dude, I read and listen to this at the same time. You know, and like we'll go through with the highlighter. But man, just like the interviews, right? I like that it's multifaceted. It's you know, it's got the interviews, it's got his sort of conversational side, it's got articles that he's written. So I like the format, but the interviews are just gold.
Hmm.
And you know, like back to you mentioned Hickson's book, and you've mentioned listening to like just content about Bresler. Same thing. Like I've been listening to Haueter on podcasts. I listened to 3 or 4 podcasts with you before we did this interview, and
Oh wow,
we're in this. Well, you know,
thanks.
want to get to know you other than like, hey, this is a guy I see in the Hickson Academy video. You know, it's because you know, like we know each other through some people, and
Right.
but it's like, okay, well, I can get a better sense of questions to ask by you know listening to these podcasts that these guys have been on, hear what they have to say, maybe try and find some things they haven't talked about, also, you know, in the process. But you know, what kind of value do you think? Like, you know, for me, I'm looking at that as a story, and I'm like, okay, Drysdale's book is just sitting right over here across from me, both of them, that because of the interviews, they're amazing sources, right? Like just like you have an interview with Hobson Gracie, and he just passed away,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I think that is so important that we have that just for those documentations. But like Hickson's book, I've listened to, again, like, and you probably have too, like everything out there that's got Hickson on it, you know, like, so I've
Hmm.
listened to the podcast, some of them like numerous times. And, you could tell that those podcasts, if you go back and listen to the book or read it, you could tell that those were used as a source. I feel
Hmm.
like for because it's like, yeah, it's the man's like those are the man's words. I
Right.
remember him saying those on that podcast. But what do you think the value of podcast or um, just like I feel like we're in a time of unorthodox sources where a podcast to me is a valuable source, but maybe I'm just new school. Like what do you think about that?
Well, so I don't know enough about this to use this as a as a reference, but I think probably the relevant correlative would be the story which my understanding is that, you know, that there was a movement within sort of the latter half of the 20th century, realizing that the stories of the people who experienced the Great Depression and World War II and those incredible, isn't that important, will go very soon. And that there was an initiative taken to interview people to get that first person documentation of those experiences. But the outreach of that was profoundly limited, right? Because that's one organization with its team going out and conducting however many interviews that it can conduct. So the fact of the maybe the unintended or maybe intended consequence of the podcasting boom en masse is that it is essentially a grassroots, organically produced StoryCorps project, creating this incredible library of content of the for basically an entire era of on every facet of life, right? So podcasts about relationship, podcasts about media, podcasts about politics, podcasts about jiu-jitsu, podcasts about all these things. So theoretically, 100 years from now, there is an overabundance of source material for all of these things. And so, yeah, obviously it's like everything else. I guess you might say that there is a real, right? So what's the criticism of like the modern era of misinformation? That in an era where we have too much information, we rely heavily on aggregators and the people who are going to tell us what is important and what it means. And when those people have a bias, that can be incredibly powerful in an information environment in which the average person is not able, just by time and energy economics, to synthesize all of the information about a given subject. I need to turn to CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whoever I turn to tell me what of all this stuff is important and what it means, because I don't have time. And so in an environment of this avalanche, this ocean of information, there are challenges of extracting from that what is significant, what is truthful, what is insightful. But that's a better challenge to have than a lack of information, probably.
Agreed. I agree. No, totally. That's the era we're in. It's like I feel like long term, it may take us a little longer to arrive at the conclusions we want, but I think we'll arrive at more informed conclusions.
Hopefully,
and that's, I think, the goal for everyone that's involved in any level of documentation of past and present. So okay, well, one other thing, Scott. While I've got you here, like, just you have been training with Rickson for the last few years now. Just got, as you mentioned, your third degree from him. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It's an awesome accomplishment. Like, wow. So obviously, many of the people that we know and have talked about today on the podcast understand the value of that guy, right? And I feel like it's a minority and an educated opinion. Really, no one I've ever met that actually trained with him had anything negative to say. But we live in a time where the sport side of jiu-jitsu is growing and popular, like a crazy amount of people competing at Masters Worlds. And, I think that I've got to train with some incredible people. It's the list of people I have left to want to really, get on the mats with is small, but that is the most impactful training experiences I've ever had have been on the mat with that guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people that have been on the mat, I understand that there's so much value there. Like, I can feel it, and not just in the sense of just like, it's in the room, right? It's like an energy, and just being around him is a special experience, learning jiu-jitsu from that guy. And I feel like people that have understand that value, but like, how would you describe like his significance to jujitsu for, in a world where there are some people that they don't understand it at all. And I think that's, again, a minority group. But for people that do, I feel like, it's like you kind of seem like you're fanboying or something like that. But it's like,
Right.
I don't perceive it that way at all. So how would you kind of describe Rickson's jiu-jitsu and his significance to the art? Tough one, I know.
That's a good question. Um, I so I guess maybe the place to start would be to say that for many of us and I know I think I'm speaking for you as well, who started jiu-jitsu in the era that we started jiu-jitsu in, Rickson represented maybe even in ways beyond what he actually did. He represented um, an ideal of what it was to be a jiu-jitsu practitioner, in terms of not only his physical capabilities, not only in terms of his technical capabilities, but in terms of the obvious spiritual and philosophical place he either came to through jiu-jitsu or just was in his being. And so the value of having him as an idol, and the how much that meant to all of us in our training, and to have that example to follow and to be inspired by, just personally, I think for a lot of us, was incredibly valuable to our jiu-jitsu journey. In terms of the history of the art, Haueter has said, and I don't know if he's said this on podcasts or if he's only said this in our conversations, but it's in the book. And he said he wrote this as a blurb for Rickson's book, and then he didn't get it in time, and so what didn't end up being in the book. But he said, without Rickson, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is it's a myth. Rickson makes it real. Like all of the things that like when you're efficient, he makes all those principles flesh. They're not just ideas. They are watching him do jiu-jitsu is watching those principles become physical reality. And so there's a way in which, obviously in the same way that Royce proved jiu-jitsu to the masses in UFC 1, Rickson sort of did that to a different tier of people. Like, I don't even know how to say this without starting to qualify and hierarchicalize this thing. But like, I think we all got into martial arts probably because we wanted to believe in the idea of the master who had this profound knowledge and had these almost superhuman abilities. And jiu-jitsu, take that down 6 levels of woo-woo, and that's what jiu-jitsu is promising. And not everybody can do that, but Rickson's doing that. And so his significance as showing us all what jiu-jitsu could be, in an era when all the world's attention is turning to jiu-jitsu because of the UFC, honestly. The importance of that, I don't think, can be overstated. Beyond that, I mean, it's hard for me to say. I just know what he has meant to me in my journey, both as an idol and then as a teacher. But it sounds like part of your question too is, why is it important for the next generation to know about Rickson?
Yes,
and obviously there are a lot of sort of obvious answers to that. You know, that he's an important figure, that he was a pioneer, all these things that we would say. But it's a little bit hard, because I guess he has meant so much to me personally that I don't know how to tell somebody that something that means so much to me should mean so much to you. You know what I mean? We all like, we all have the things that mean something to, like, it's, you know what I mean? I just know that, like, if you are 22 and you see Gordon Ryan, and having Gordon Ryan as your ideal it takes up a lot of your mental energy. It takes up your emotional energy of, like, I really want to be like that. Oh my God, he's my hero. When he fights, I'm right there. If that's the thing for you, I almost don't feel like it's my place to walk into your life and go, no, take that shit out and put Rickson in there. Like, your journey, what's important to you in your journey is your journey. You know, you're gonna sort of, every generation is gonna have its heroes. You know, it would almost be like if Rickson had been like, no, don't look at me, look at my father. It's like, yeah, but I don't feel connected to your father and your father's era. I feel connected to you. And so that's sort of my moment. And there's going to be a next moment. And then there's going to be a moment after that. It's sort of an interesting conversation to have. Interested in history and believes in the importance of history. And I sort of go back and forth. And I don't know if you listened to that last podcast I was on, but I kind of said, like, the guy said, it's important that you're helping preserve these stories, because it's sad when stories are lost. And I think I kind of said something like, it's sad, but stories are lost all the time. That's actually the thing that stories do, is that, you know, I always think about, Mark Maron told a story about Andy Richter telling him. Maron went on Conan and he did a bad set, and he was telling Andy Richter about it, and Andy Richter goes, it's just paper boats on the ocean, man. It's like each day you put a paper boat on the ocean and it goes away and it's gone. You know, the past just goes. It just disappears. And we have these moments, like even Richard's book, we're going to preserve it for what? 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and then it's probably going to disappear. So we've elongated its window. We haven't made it stand in time. It's not, you know, like the poem Ozymandias, right? This idea that even these things that seem eternal, they all go away. And so I'm not concerned with having an argument with anybody who's coming up now and saying, you should appreciate Rickson more. Because I think it's just the way these things go. And honestly, I almost feel like it's so part of the way Rickson understands it that he's not going to sit there and argue like, oh, nobody's listening to me. Why aren't they listening? Like, different Gracies or different people you talk to, they're going to, everybody now sucks and this is the real jiu-jitsu. And I don't think he's doing that. He's saying, okay, what do I have to offer? I'm me. The context is what it is. Do I have something to offer to the context? Is there work I can do here? Yes, there is. No, there isn't. If there is, I do it. If there isn't, I don't do it. But we all fade away. You know, we all have our moment and then our moment is over. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like my answer to that question would always end up being personal, and I wouldn't know how to say it in terms of, I don't know, cultural.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a tough one to dive off into, you know. It's
Yeah.
like you either see the value or you don't. And I definitely do think it's a sort of a waste to argue about it, you know. It's we live in an era where you know, and for me a lot of it started like, and I saw you share a picture of the VHS like yesterday or
Right.
something, but when I saw Choke for the first time, I was a jiu-jitsu white belt, and I was like, oh, this is what's possible. And it was just, I don't know, it was significant. You know, I just, again, it's like, it's hard to describe. I think in philosophy, you would say that someone like a Hickson has an intrinsic value, right? Just, you know, the value that he provides, you can't put it in, you can't quantify it. You know, and it's not that it's non-quantifiable. We could sit here and talk about it in a lot of different ways, but there's just an authenticity there, and a realness that we appreciate, and you know, I think that is a big part of this story of telling jiu-jitsu in the United States. And we're fortunate in that we're in a time where he's here and he's teaching, and
Unbelievably fortunate. I mean, in the history of infinity, that we overlap and with a moment when this guy's still on the mat and willing to teach us is unbelievable. The odds against it are astronomical.
yeah, I always like when I quantify it to people, I'm just like, I named both my dogs after him. Which
Yep.
he found kind of funny, but at the same time was you know, it was a funny moment. But anyway, well, you know, Scott, I really I appreciate you again taking the time to talk
Dude, it's been
writing
my
with
pleasure.
me, to talk jujitsu. You know, I think we have a lot of shared interest, and this has been a motivational and inspiring afternoon for me. So thank you again.
Dude, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. This has been great.
All right, Scott, we'll talk to you soon, man. Have a
All
good
right,
one.
thanks, man. You too.